light and heavy letters. So the majority of the Arabic letters are what we call light letters, and that means that when they're pronounced, the back of the tongue is not raised, and we mean when we come to look at the heavy letters, we'll see that the tongue is really lifted up at the back of the mouth. So light letters essentially are the ones where the back of the tongue is not purposely raised. Now the sound of the light letters with the fatha is the a, as in the word cat. So let's take some examples. So these letters here are classed as the light letters, and they've got the fatha. So we've got the ba, the ta, the fa, the na, and the la. Okay, so ba, ta, fa, na, la all have got this ah sound, and this is with the fatha. The light letters, which are the majority of the Arabic letters, have the ah sound. Now the heavy letters. Now there are 7 letters which are classed as the heavy letters, and in essence what happens is whenever you pronounce these letters, there's a raising of the back of the tongue, and the tongue is actually raised with these heavy letters with any vowel they have. However, you see a significant change in the way the fatha is pronounced on these heavy letters, and they give a R sound, and in English the closest thing you would get to it is the word art. So we'll just have a look at these. So first, this is a list of the actual letters which are classed as heavy letters. So we have the sad, the dad, the ta, the dha, the kha, the qaf, and the ghain. Okay, now we've put here a set of Arabic letters, and we've essentially, for most of the heavy letters, we've paired up the counterpart in the light letters. And let's take an example here. At the beginning here we've got the sa, and the next one is the sad, which with the fatha will be pronounced as sa. And the reason we put the sa and the sa together is to emphasize the difference, and these are letters that people must differentiate. And a common mistake is if people don't understand the heaviness and the lightness, they will pronounce the sa the same as the sa, which is not right. So we're just going to go through the letters. You see at the end the kha and the ghain have not got counterparts. So let's start at the beginning of the line. We've got the sa and the sa. We've got the da and the dha. We've got the ta and the ta. We've got the dha and the dha. We've got the ka and the qa. We've got the kha, and then last of all we've got gha. So the heavy letters, if you were to say them slowly by yourself, you will see that the tongue is raised at the back of the mouth. And essentially the difference is in the air pressure. When you say sa, i.e. any of the light letters, the air actually will exit through the front of your mouth. So the direction of the air is horizontally to the front of your mouth. So if you just try and say sa, da, ta, dha, ka, the sound is going forward. Now when you say the sa, the da, the ta, the dha, the qa, the kha, and the gha, you will notice that because you're raising your tongue, the air pressure is actually going up towards the top of your mouth. Okay, so there's some pressure build up of the air and it's going upwards. So try saying sa, sa. You'll notice that very little air will go forward through the front of your mouth, and this is essentially the difference. It's the pressure there's pressure on the heavy letters and the air is being forced towards the top, so it's going vertically up inside of your mouth. Now what we'll do, we'll look at some samples of the heavy letters just to reinforce the actual pronunciation. So the first one we've got here is salatihim, salatihim. Then we have arda, arda. Now when we cover the makharij of each letter, and when you do this with your tajweed teacher, they will train you to pronounce these properly. Here we're just giving a very brief example of the heavy letters. So the next one is ta'ami, ta'ami. Then we have dhanna, dhanna. Next one we have is khannas, khannas. Then we have uqad, uqad. Then we have ghassaqa, ghassaqa. So the main thing to take away from this is they are not the same as the heavy the light letters. The light letters have a sound. All of the heavy letters have a sound which is closer to the R sound in English. And again, this is only learned properly with training with a teacher. And just a note here is try not to make the letters too heavy. So if we take the sa, don't change it into a sa. So it's more an R sound than an O sound. Okay, so a note here as well on other heavy letters. So the Ra and the Lam are only heavy under certain circumstances. Okay, so these two letters, the Ra and the Lam, they're sometimes light and they're sometimes heavy. Now the letter Ra is actually a very difficult letter to master. It has about 15 rules which have to be learned, and those rules determine whether the Ra is light or heavy, and the pronunciation of the heavy Ra and the light Ra is not easy. So we're going to have a complete lesson dedicated to explaining this, and again this is something that is mastered with a teacher. Now the Lam is heavy only when it is used in the name of Allah, and there are rules here. So essentially all you have to remember is that with the name of Allah, when the name of Allah is preceded by a letter which carries either a fatha or a dhamma, then the Lam of Allah goes heavy. So let's look at some examples here. So the first one here we have Bismillahi. Okay, so we have the Allah preceded by a kasra on the meme. So in this case we say Millahi. So the Lam is La. Remember, La is light, is the A sound. So again it's Bismillahi, La. Now in the next two cases the name of Allah is preceded by a fatha and a dhamma. So it's Huwallahu, Huwallahu, La. So again it's the R sound, this is the heavy sound. And then in the last one we've got Lullahi, Lullahi. Again it's that R sound, the heavy sound. So it's a simple rule, but it's a basic mistake that many people make in their recitation. Now we're going to talk about something called skilled transitioning. So we've got a rule here. A light letter is never affected by a heavy letter and vice versa. A skilled reciter is trained to make transition from light to heavy letters and vice versa without breaking this rule. So what we're saying here, let's take some examples. A common mistake with people who are not trained with a teacher, tajweed teacher properly, is when there are combinations of light letters and heavy letters together, they change the sound, especially of the light letters. So the light letters suddenly become a bit too heavy, and this is something that is picked up by a trained teacher, and it's something that you will get used to once you've been your mistakes have been picked out. So we'll take a few examples here. So the first one, we've got sudurinnas. Okay, now the mistake that people make is they will say sudu. So they say su, which is the back of the tongue is raised, and then when they come into the dal, they keep the tongue raised, so they make the dal heavy. So you have to quickly change and transition to a light letter, so it's sudu. So you've got, so the dal is do, you don't make it du. Okay, so sudurinnas. Take another example, idha waqab. Now the ba is an echo letter here, so we're doing the qalqala, but to know, at the end we've got heavy letter and a light letter. So again, the mistake is some people will say waqab, waqab, and the ba is made heavy here, ba, waqab, and it should be waqaba, ba, waqaba, waqaba. Okay, so idha waqaba. So slight difference there, but a trained teacher will pick this up. We have the same sort of example in the next one. It's fil uqad. So you've got to make sure that when you do the dal, you bring the makhraj, the point of articulation, back to the proper point of articulation of the dal, and the tongue is not raised. The next one is probably more clear. We've got sayasla. So the ya is light. Now what people will do as a mistake is they affect the ya with the sound of the sad. So they say sayas, and they make the ya heavy. So instead of saying ya, they go straight into ya. So we have to keep the ya as the ya, and then quickly transition into the sad. So it's sayasla. Okay, sayasla. Now the last one, if we take just the last word on its own, it's khalaqa. Okay, so we've got a heavy, a light, and then a heavy letter. Now a mistake people will make, they'll say khalaqa. So they make the lam heavy. Instead of saying la, they say la. It should be khalaqa. And this is where the training of the jaws takes place, and also the training of the ear to be able to hear these very slight differences. But again, this is tajweed. This is learning tajweed properly, and when you sit with a trained teacher, they will check every single word and every letter is proper. You cannot add heaviness to a light letter. Okay, so the next topic is the light and the heavy alif. So the long vowel alif is light if preceded by a light letter, and heavy if preceded by a heavy letter. So what do we mean by that? We'll explain in a minute. But the other point is the alif is a separate sound to the sound being lengthened, and again we'll explain this. So let's take the first example here. We've got the noon and the alif. So it's double length. This is our original mad. However, the noon is light, so the alif, which is its own separate sound here, although it's normally explained that we say na, which is too long, it's actually the na, which is the noon with the fatha, plus the sound of the alif. And because the noon is light, it has an a sound, the alif also has an a sound, so it will be na. Okay, now we'll look at the next two, and you notice these are both to do with the qaf. So I'm going to read the first line. Okay, so it's narullahil muqadah. Okay, so listen to the sound of the qaf, muqadah. So the qa is qadah, so it's heavy but it's still qadah. Now the second one, the same qaf is al-qari'ah. Al-qari'ah. Now it has the qa. Now between the two you've got muqadah and al-qari. So the second one sounds a bit heavier, qa, whereas the first one's muqadah. Now it's not actually the qaf is not changing. The qaf is actually the same. It's the alif in the second one is a R sound, because the alif itself has now become heavy because of the preceding heavy letter, and that's why it sounds slightly heavier, but it's the alif itself which has become heavier. Okay, so again I'll just read those again. Narullahil muqadah, al-qari'ah. Okay, so very subtle point there is the alif itself is heavy or light, and it's a separate sound to the letter that precedes it. Now, just to emphasize that the alif is separate, this line here, which is Rabbil Alameen, Rabbil Alameen. Okay, now the Ain has the sound of A, and then we have the alif. So what can happen is, if you say, you just double the length of the Ain, so the Ain is A, you'll go A. Okay, but the actual sound is A. Okay, so you have to say the Ain and then very quickly release to give the A sound of the alif. So they're two separate sounds, so you have to release. Remember, the Ain is done by squeezing the muscles in the throat alongside the windpipe, and you have to release them very quickly to get the alif in as an alif without squeezing it. So it's Rabbil Alameen, and again a skilled tajweed teacher will recognize if you hold the Ain too long and you keep the throat constricted too long, because then you're not saying the alif, you're just doubling the sound of the Ain itself. Okay, and that's really an introduction to the heavy letters.